Well, no, look, I think it's amazing when people are stepping up and, putting yourself in that position to raise money. I think is a really laudable thing, and I don't see why anyone wouldn't think about it in those terms. But the big issue is homelessness has increased over the last 10 years. We've gone from about 1,700 people living on our streets to about 4,700. People dying on our streets has gone up by about 50%. And, there is a failure of policy in that. So whether it's the failure to tackle the housing crisis, whether it's the failure to deal with no rent, fault evictions, or it's the cut to housing benefits. They've all had a detrimental impact on homelessness. And I think you're completely right. It is an absolute travesty that in, the fifth richest country, we have people living and dying on our streets. And it doesn't matter who wins the next election.
Ian points out this is an international.
And I think, Claire's piece is a really, really good one. And she sort of accuses the Tories of having disdain for voters, partly because of the kind of unwillingness to stand up to scrutiny and, Boris Johnson's, unwillingness to do the Andrew Neil interview. But for me, the kind of really powerful point she makes is the manifesto is incredibly empty. It's incredibly thin. She calls it disdainful, particularly against the backdrop of, the squeeze in living standards, the climate emergency, the ageing society. And the manifesto is supposed to be a blueprint for what you're trying to do for the country and how you're trying to transform and change the country. And, for me, it's either an election strategy, so you get rid of the barnacles, you say absolutely nothing, you coast to number 10, which shows disdain, quite frankly, for voters, or they have no answers, they have no ideas. And if they do win, and there's still a big if of that, but if they do win and they literally have no solutions to the big problems that we face going into the next 5 years, I find that terrifying. And this is where I think John Harris's piece is interesting. So it's a great slogan. It does cut through. It's very clear, by contrast, Labour's sort of central line is quite kind of complex in all of this. But, the big issue for them is, say you do get a whole load of lifelong Labour voters voting for Conservatives. What then? What happens on the 1st of February when we're still talking about Brexit? And yes, we may have left, but we haven't got it done because Brexit is a process that's going to take at least another 5 years, if not 10 years. But more importantly, Brexit was supposed to be about change. And just getting Brexit done, just with the leaving in terms of the withdrawal agreement, is not going to unleash the change that the country wants. And what worries me is behind that manifesto, there was nothing about what they're going to do for the country.
That's what
it's going to bite him in the...
It's quite clear, endless analysis. Everyone says it. We're not left-right anymore. We're leave, remain and all that. But once Brexit is done, is that going to be a change permanently, or are people just going to revert to the old left-right?
Then the challenge really is there. If the Conservatives win a majority at the election, they will then have 5 years. If at the end of that 5 years nothing has changed, to coin a phrase from Theresa May, then Labour may well think that this was quite a good election to lose this time, because they will be in prime position then. They will have a new leader, despite what the
And that would be asking for a fifth Tory election victory, which has never been done.
Exactly, and politics is always cyclical. You can go 3 or maybe 4, as Thatcher and Major did, but you don't go after that. So whoever becomes the next leader after Corbyn, assuming the Conservatives win this time, they stand an extremely good chance of being Prime Minister and winning that election, if the Conservatives cannot prove by the end of those 5 years that things have materially changed in all sorts of ways. We're agreeing far too much, aren't we?
I know this, but I think that is a real risk for the Conservatives, because if they do win and they go in without a plan, without perspectives of what they do once we've left the European Union, against the backdrop of a decade of living standard squeeze, we know a recession's coming in the next year and a half. They will preside over that.
Do we?
Well, all the international evidence suggests it's not just a UK problem. I think globally we're on the verge of a slowdown.
I mean, technically, talking about cycles, we're overdue.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. And our public services are in an absolute state. So if they preside over that and they don't get a grip and they don't have a plan, at the end of that 5 years, they will be punished. And you could be talking about a Conservative government out of power for a
OK, thank you very much. We've got this. Miatta, what goes through your mind when you read these dossiers about Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a kind of ferocious attack, and actually quite similar to the attack that we saw in 2017, talking about both Corbyn the man, his kind of Marxist views. And I mean, I think I say 2 things. I think actually some of this is already baked in. So, this is not new criticism for those that don't like Jeremy Corbyn.
But, in 2017, he seemed to rise above it. The kind of magic grandpa element was there. It doesn't, the Jeremy Corbyn element doesn't seem to be there this time.
Well, no, so I think there are 2 things. I think for some voters, they either decide they like Corbyn, so they'll vote for Labour, or actually they'll vote for Labour irrespective of Corbyn. And I think the point is, on the other side, you've got Boris Johnson, who's equally polarising, who's equally, troubled, not that likeable for some voters. So,
Right, I mean, he's not seen as a national security threat in the way that.
Well, what I would say is, you take Nick Timothy's "We're about to unleash chaos." And I'm sorry, the last 10 years where we've seen the squeeze on living standards, where we've seen public services on our knees, where we've seen actually our politics completely implode over Brexit, this is chaos. We are living in it anyway. So the risk that suddenly a Corbyn government is going to make it any worse, I think rings quite shallow.
Is there anything actually unfair or untrue in these presentations? I mean, the Venezuela stuff, the IRA stuff, the stuff to do with Hezbollah. I mean, they all happened, didn't they?
Well, yes and no. I mean, look, the kind
What's
of...
the no?
Well, the Venezuela stuff, that this is somehow a kind of Marxist agenda, I think is nonsense. And actually, most sensible people know it's nonsense. And if you look at the perspective...
Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell both praised Chavez's Venezuela.
And Maduro.
Well, so there are, and they've criticised other parts of it. But I think for me, in the end, there is a kind of over-characterisation of what it is that they've done or said in the past, and we are talking about the future of the country. And what I'd say is, well, actually, if I care about policy, I care about what it is that they're proposing to take forward to the country, and actually, a lot of it is literally just an advancement of what we see in a lot of Scandinavian countries. So this idea that there is...
That is just complete rubbish.
Well,
this is an extremist manifesto that they're putting forward in terms of the money that they would borrow. It is extreme. There is no getting away from that.
You take the question of investment, and actually what we're doing... Borrowing for investment. So it's partly borrowing, because
borrowing.
On the day-to-day spending side, the 80 billion is accounted for by increases in tax for corporations, increases in wealth tax. And then on the investment side, which the Conservatives are already saying, it's borrowing for investment.
It's not. Nationalisation, 200 billion, where's that money coming from?
Let's go to the nub of it. What we're talking about is public spending that's currently 39% that would go up to 44%, which is consistent in what we see in most of Western European countries. So from our trajectory of the last 10 years, it feels like a big jump. But when you put it in context, this is not radical. This is what we're seeing across Germany, across the Scandinavian countries, and quite frankly, it's where I think the country ought to be.